Okay, I'll call to order this May 20th meeting of the Underhill Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is, are there any changes to the agenda? Nobody?
I have one little one, which is that we were going to try to come up with someone who could commit to attending, from this commission, who could commit to attending June 12th.
Oh yeah, what's on the June 12th select board meeting?
This was the follow-up conversation to what we're talking about tonight about the Tier 1B designation, whether we apply or get it.
Was I unable to?
You said you thought you had a conflict.
Oh, I do have a conflict. I don't know if I'm actually going to go or not, though.
Yes, please.
I will do it. I will do it.
Okay. So we're going to need to change the agenda.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay. That takes us to actually the item I should have opened with, or being remiss. Welcome to the new planning commission members. Awesome. So glad you're here. That takes us to public comment. No one from the public is on, so we can skip over that. There are.
Yes.
I thought it was
actually. I'd like to make a comment.
Oh, sorry. We had something up on the screen and I didn't see that. My apologies. Can you flip over, Larry? So, can you just give your, please do, and give your name for the minutes.
Hi, my name is Russ Vogel, 611 Pleasant Valley Road.
Oh yes, hi Russ.
How you doing?
Please, good, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to come, and the floor is yours.
I just only have a few minutes here. I'm on the road. I've been following the updates and the drafts for the land use regulations concerning the firewood processing sawmill situation.
Yes.
And as of the last draft that you have from May 1st, I'm questioning why. Sorry, there's a lot of background noise.
Did we lose
Hello?
Russ? Oh, you're still there, Russ.
All right, a lot of background noise. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
You're
I can
still
hear
there.
you now.
Okay.
All right. The as of May 1st, the last draft that I saw that you guys posted of the Underhill land use regulation changes, I see you have added a 90 decibel limit of the property.
Oh, we lost. Is it us or is it him? Yeah, we're still here, Russ. You cut out for a second though.
I see that you guys have added a 90 decibel at property limit for 2-hour adjustment in there, and I'm wondering where that came from. We already have, the town already has noise ordinances, 72 decibels at the property line at a certain hertz is the maximum decibel level. It seems like that's been thrown in there from an outside view for a specific purpose. I'm not sure what kind of research has been done, but 90 decibels is really loud. Even if it's for 2 hours.
I'm gonna let Larry answer that because he remembers exactly where it came from. He said, Russ, I also just wanted to tell you, you'll see this on the next agenda. Just because I know you're in your car and I want to make sure you have, or it sounds like you're in your car. I just want to make sure you feel like you have ample opportunity with the Planning Commission. At our next meeting, we're going to be discussing these again. So you are obviously more than welcome to attend in person. And I know that Dave Sills has said that he is going to come in to the next meeting. Brad Holden told me that. So I just don't want you to feel like you're getting short shrift from your comments here. That preface being given, Larry, can you tell Russ where that came from?
Russ, I would just say this is a work in progress, and we initially set the decibel limits much lower, but as we talked about it, we became aware that there is a conflict already between our town's noise ordinance and the performance standard for noise limits that's in the land use regs. And so we still haven't really worked that out. The higher list, I think the 90 decibel figure in the proposal came from some research that we did from other towns' standards. But by no means is this the final word. We still have some work to do on that.
Okay, and I understand that. I know this is a work in progress, and while I don't expect that noise level currently to affect my property or nearby, I'm thinking of the big picture here and what could possibly happen at anybody else's property or somebody, that's nearby. If somebody's allowed to have that noise level for 2 hours, say 2 to 4 p.m. on one side of them, and say a firewood processing operation that makes a lot of noise is allowed on the other side of them, and they decide to do 4 to 6 p.m., it could, and then one behind them, you never know. You got to think of worst case scenarios here, that you could potentially have a long time in 90 decibels coming from the edge of the property, which is extremely loud. I work in a noisy environment. I have all my life in aviation, and I can tell you 90 decibels is quite a lot to listen to, and when you're trying to enjoy your property.
Would your
I'm
sorry, Russ, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm all set.
Oh, I was going to ask, were you thinking that using the levels out of the nuisance ordinance would be more appropriate, or did you have a suggestion, or were you just, I don't mean this as a critique in any way. Don't take it that way. Were you just thinking the 90 was too high and we need to rethink it, or did you think that we should stick with what's in the nuisance ordinance, or did you have any thoughts on that?
I think 90 is too high. I definitely think that on the edge of your on the edge of a property, because the operation from what I'm looking at could be 300 feet away from a house, but you're still allowing 90 decibels at the edge of the property line. And what if somebody's house is, I don't know what the setbacks are allowed or where they are in Underhill, but what if the house is on the edge of that property or nearby it, but on the edge of that property you're getting the 90 decibels? That's quite a bit. I think they're too high. I can't speak as to what a decent level would be for that, a reasonable, and I'm not even sure why there needs to be a 2 hour, you're allowed to have a higher decibel level at 2 hours. Not sure what the real purpose is of that. I'm not educated on the reasoning why. I'm questioning also the setbacks allowed for the operation too. Just to give you an example, the recent experience we had, as you're well aware of, according to Google Earth, 320 feet away was my front door, and I have recordings I'm glad to share with you if you want of what we were experiencing between 70 and 80 decibels with that operation that distance from the house. Not saying it's every situation, but there's all kinds of different machines out there people might buy or use. The setbacks may not be far enough away, and I think the decibel level is too high definitely for 2 hours, or even 1 hour. I don't even know why it needs to go up that high.
Did you have a suggestion, Russ, on what you thought the setback should be, just to make sure I fully note your comments, or do you just want us to rethink it?
I'm not experienced enough in setbacks and what would be appropriate for that. I'm kind of wondering if
Okay.
it needs to be aimed towards noise level rather than setback. I haven't
Okay.
looked at it much because I've been gone for a couple weeks out of state, and not wanting to put time towards all that on vacation. But
Yeah, no, that's
yeah,
very understandable.
I think it needs to be strongly considered about this because, you know, you're gonna look at the worst case scenario, no matter where it may be in town, and you know who's living, the number of houses around, who's nearby wanting to do that. It could be on both sides of the property. I urge you guys to do a lot of, you know, study on it and thought process on it and think, what if I was living there and each of my next door neighbors wanted to do something like that and applied with the town and they approved it? How would that affect my enjoyment of my property?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Russ. And just as I mentioned too, if you are interested, obviously thank you for your feedback, and we'll discuss it at the next meeting. It's not on the agenda tonight, but I very much appreciate the feedback, and you are very welcome, obviously, to attend the next meeting as well, if you would like.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the work on this and you know, the thought going into all this. I know there's a lot to it, and just like with everything else, you know, you got to look at all sides.
Absolutely. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh, of course. Okay, that takes us to the Underhill future land use map, which is Darren. So I'm going to just hand that over to you right now.
Happy to take that. And I do want to mention that colleague Maya is tonight just listening in, helping take notes, and contributing as if I say something stupid. So it does, it's known to happen. So welcome to some new members. My name is Darren Schiller. I'm with Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, as is Maya. We've met with the Underhill Planning Commission a couple of times since the beginning of the year to talk about a update to the Chittenden County regional future land use map and our regional plan, which affects all of our communities because it is going to change how the state designation program works. There's going to be some potential implications to Act 250 regulation in terms of potentially removing regulation in a couple of places where we want to see housing growth. And it's about trying to make sure that local plans and our regional plan are aligned with state goals and aligned with each other a little better, and to have a little bit more, not to say compatibility, but a little bit more meshing of the gears between all of these different functions of government and levels of government so that we're all rowing in the same direction. So what we've talked about so far is the fact that we've put out this draft map with these new categories of future land use as required under statute. These are going to be a statewide standardized approach. So each regional planning commission is going to be using the same categories and talking the same language. We're trying to make that as compatible and corollary to local future land use maps as possible, but obviously Vermont is not a monolith, and even amongst RPCs, there's a little variation. So what we're trying to do is get things right at the local level so that fits at the regional level, and then when we update our regional plan, and we go to the new land use review board, which is kind of a reimagined natural resources board. They now have oversight of regional plans and confirmation of them, so we're going to try to make sure that they know we've done our homework and due diligence and done some work with our communities to build this map from the ground up to the extent that we can. So that's some context for the new members. What we'd like to get to tonight is revisit some things we talked about with the map at the last meeting. We also talked about housing targets, but I think we kind of talked that topic through. There's a correlation between all three, and part of Act 181, which is what created this whole process, is trying to respond to the housing crisis and really plan for our future and make sure that we're able to accommodate our housing needs in a way that still furthers our compact settlement and smart growth goals. But I think, what we talked about last month or last meeting was Underhill's got some work to do to think about how to creatively meet those housing targets, partly in line with its new map and with its own changes to its own map or changes to how you regulate things, and more importantly, how you incentivize housing growth in the places where you want to see it. You want to see it in the ways you want to see it. So what we'd like to talk about tonight primarily is that revised map and Tier 1B. That is a option for the town to request partial exemption from Act 250. Act 250 is a state level review of land use that's looking specifically at regional and statewide impacts of development. When we're talking about small scale housing growth between up to 50 units, which is what that Tier 1B exemption could provide for, the idea is that if we have properly planned in areas where we want to see housing, we've already addressed those potential impacts. We've said, this is the place where we want to grow. We know how to accommodate that and provide the infrastructure and deal with, the traffic impacts or whatever it may be. So we don't need additional review. It's going to help speed housing development in those areas where we're kind of trying to, again, grow in the same direction. So Underhill, as any community in Vermont now, has the option to say, in the areas that CCRPC has mapped as, in your case, village center and village area, you can request that Tier 1B exemption from Act 250. Any development in those areas would not, that is 10 units to 50 units, would not trigger Act 250. And as long as it's on 10 or fewer acres. A significantly large project would still go through Act 250, and those developments would still be subject to local review, any requirements of the Underhill zoning regulations, as well as any applicable state permits such as water and wastewater, wetlands, stormwater, general construction, etc. So it's just an opportunity to kind of provide a carrot for someone who is putting housing in the right places. So the question before you is going to be, what areas, if any, of Underhill do you want to have that Tier 1B exemption? You can say none of the above, or parts of those village centers and village areas. That's the recommendation we're looking for you to make to the select board, because ultimately it is their decision as a legislative body. We're trying to make sure that this is kept official for our purposes, for the land use review board as well. Before we get to that, I do want to touch on the map again and show you some changes that we made based on the discussion last meeting. Before, the Underhill Flats and Riverside Village area, the area in lighter pink, was a lot narrower, a lot more limited, because we were trying to base this off of some statewide or some statutory criteria that said we want to make sure village areas are walkable from village centers. That village center in the darker pink is based on your existing state designation from the Department of Housing and Community Development. You won't have to get that renewed anymore because we are embedding it in our regional map. We're also able to expand that a little bit from what the state has done to capture things that they may have excluded for one reason or another. We're trying to make this more comprehensive land use approach. Because we were trying to look at walkability specifically for that village area, we kept things tight. But in looking at that map again after our discussion and your indication that it might have been a little small, especially if we're trying to think about accommodating your housing target in that, we looked again and said, hang on, there's a water service area that covers the area we've mapped from Champlain Water District. It comes basically from the tank up on Poker Hill Road down through to 15 and also extends out to some of those existing neighborhoods. Another reason we didn't include those, for instance, I think Maple Ridge and, I'm sorry, I'm not totally familiar with the street names, and I should be at this point. But part of the reason we didn't include those is that we figured there's limited development potential. They're already pretty well built out. But with water supply, we recognize that there is a potential for a little more development if someone wanted to add more ADUs or duplexes or maybe subdivide if they've got a little extra space to do that. But also, it helped us capture a few more of the parcels on Poker Hill Road and out a little bit on River Road, not very far, but just that one parcel on the town line.
I got a question about that.
Yeah,
What?
just to say, quickly,
Okay.
we wanted to capture that so that any development potential that exists in this area is included in that potential Tier 1B area. It's also can benefit from the state community investment program, which we talked about at the last meeting. I'm happy to revisit.
Well, why didn't you go further out River Road and then I give another question after that?
Sure. Based on the conversation last meeting, there was some hesitation about going further along River Road because that's some farmland. We have it mapped right now as rural agriculture and forestry in that teal color. So because we're trying to follow Underhill's lead with what you're doing with your land use, we're not coming in and saying, you need to change what you're doing locally in order to make this all work. We want you to make that decision first. And we're also trying to recognize that something that's currently being used for agricultural forestry probably should stay that way. But maybe you do some local planning and figure out that that is a good spot, and you talk with the landowner and the community says, yeah, maybe that's a good place to make that trade-off. That's up to you after we've finished this
So
process.
we have to discuss that amongst ourselves. I mean,
If you're interested.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
don't have to decide that now. You
Right.
don't have to decide it before we adopt this regional plan. Once it's adopted and as you do your local planning cycles, that's something you might want to bring up.
and do you recommend that we stay away from agricultural land? Because there's a big farm in Underhill Flats that's like 180 acres maybe. That's probably, in a lot of towns, it would be prime land to develop. I don't know what, you can't say what those folks are going to want to do today, but we're looking at 25 years down the road. So and they might sell it or they might want to develop it, and I'm not going to, project what they might want to do with it. But and then there's, if you go down Route 15 further, there's an old gravel pit that's prime, and so I was just curious. That's something that we have to discuss amongst ourselves, where we want to expand the village center.
Yeah, and I think you should have those conversations with those landowners who you're talking about, including in that potential area, and have that with the community about what are some of the trade-offs that they might see in adding more into the village right there. Maybe the cost of some farmland, but maybe that is okay because you have farmland elsewhere. We won't presume what those discussions might surface, but we definitely encourage you to start having those conversations because it is, even with this expanded village area, it's still pretty limited. As Brian pointed out, in terms of being able to meet the housing targets that Underhill's been, that we've broken down to each of our municipalities, including for Underhill.
My one, not to interrupt, Darren, but my one concern with that really, I mean, we can quickly talk about it later, but I went back and looked at the town plan and our housing section, which, I mean, in theory represents what the town wants, right? We have all these public hearings and blah, blah, blah. And if you look at our strategies, like the top 4 ones, I'm not going to read them word for word, but it's like explore strategies for well and septic, research the feasibility of expanding municipal water and sewer in the centers, like look at greater density opportunities in the centers, evaluate minimum lot size in the centers. Like my concern with agriculture land is like there's nothing in our publicly approved document that even alludes to the fact that we should start trying to develop farmland.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is like the last time the public had a chance to opine on this.
When was that?
You know what I mean?
When was that?
When was it? You were not. It was 2020.
Oh, so it's not like ancient. It's,
No. These have to be redone every 8 years.
Okay.
So, it was 2020. Were you on it?
No.
2021.
David was. What was it? 2021. You're right.
Your plan is dated 2021, but the discussion's probably
So
happening.
the discussions happened in 2020, like the public hearings and stuff.
so then like,
It's just you and I, David. Everyone else smartened up. Okay. Anyway, this is my 2 cents.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I agree. We support that as well. We wouldn't want to wholesale go against anything that's in the town plan or put something out that hasn't gone through that public process. That's part of what we're doing now, the public process. But as you mentioned, Brian, town plan comes around every 8 years. Our regional plans will come around at least every 8 years, at minimum every 8 years, but potentially sooner than that. So there's opportunities to adjust things if the situation changes and the community says, yeah, I don't know, let's take a look at that. But I think it is something that we've talked about in a few other communities where there is such limited space in their existing villages. Is start there, see what you can do, but maybe at a future point you have to look further out and look at other opportunities. This is a 25-year horizon to try and address these issues. So there is time, but it's good to start laying the groundwork.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on what Darren has said so far?
Darren, did you change anything for Underhill Center Village?
I did not, because we didn't really talk about that. We were a little more focused on Underhill Flats. And I didn't see too many opportunities. One, because there's not public water or wastewater there. And a few spots that I thought maybe would be worth looking at for soils are already pretty well developed. And it seems like you're focused on both villages, but it seems like there's a little more opportunity in the spots in general. Happy to look at that again, although I think we are really trying to tidy up the map and get this going through our regional process. As I said, there's opportunities to adjust this in the future. One of the things that we can do easily is a minor amendment to our map, which is a change of 10 acres or less around these land use areas. So that's easy to do if there's a development opportunity that came up and we said, gosh, it's right next to the villages, and we really should have included it the first time. That's easy. Beyond that, I'd say let's let your town plan process lead that, and our regional process lead that.
So I have a question. My question is, so is your specific ask from us tonight for the select board to decide whether or not we want to do the 1B and okay.
Yes.
And what piece of land that would cover? And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your email. Did you have a recommendation on where that would go? I thought you did.
Yeah, we don't have a really strong recommendation.
Yeah.
We'll tell you the eligible areas are the village centers and the village areas. And given that it's such a small area and you've done some good planning around that, it seems to make sense that those would be good spots to have Tier 1B exemption. Mostly, not
For all the pink, you mean?
Yeah.
all of the dark and light.
All of it. Okay, gotcha. I misunderstood that bit.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
And the reason for that is not necessarily that you're going to see a significant development of 10 to 50 unit projects. I mean, you do have one just on the other side of the town line, but that's Jericho. That's for them to decide. It's more probably an opportunity to allow for incremental development that may not trigger Act 250, but if someone wanted to do a couple of new homes on a lot that maybe already had an Act 250 permit or had some sort of condition, it would help. We think we're just still waiting for the rules to get clarified, but we believe that would be a helpful thing to not have to go through Act 250 review for housing development that is small and incremental in your villages. It's a good way to signal that this is where you want things to happen, and to help provide that, ease the regulatory process for housing development of the scale that you want to see.
And sorry, one other thing, just process-wise again. So I think I misunderstood something on your email to Larry and I. So we are not having to come up with a housing number for the select board now?
Not exactly. I mean, you have a housing target that CCRPC has
Right, the
provided.
low, mid, high ones that you gave to us.
Right. You don't have to do anything about that. You don't have to take any formal action on the map or the housing targets. We're just asking for some sort of action on the Tier 1B because we want to get that very clear.
I misunderstood that bit. So,
Yeah,
okay. All right.
We'll take feedback on it. But,
Got it. But it's nothing we need to act on. It's just the Tier 1B that we need to act on.
Correct.
Okay. Understood.
So Darren, I have queued up the memo that, I don't know if you drafted, but I have your memo, the one we drafted, the memo that has the proposed motion. And I'll put that up on the screen.
Yeah.
And I also have, before I put that one up, I'm going to put up the comparison between Tier 1 and Tier 1A and 1B. What are the specific tangible benefits that are associated with each of those categories? So let me put that up first.
Yeah,
I thought
sorry to
1A
shower
was-
you with documents.
I thought 1A was for big, not applicable to Underhill.
Yeah,
Like it's for big development.
it is for communities that have a high level of development review capacity and a lot of infrastructure and
Like Burlington or something.
yeah, I think so. The communities in Chittenden County that have been interested are Burlington, South Burlington, Williston, maybe Essex for a couple of areas, Essex Town, possibly Essex Junction, though they're trying to weigh the benefits based on just some particulars to them. And a few other communities might do it for a limited area, but it is a fairly high bar. It's just a way to have those communities say, look, we've got this covered. We already do all the stuff that Act 50 does. We don't need that. Tier 1B is this sort of, medium option for smaller towns that have a village center or a village area or even a slightly larger area, but are really just focused on housing.
Larry, do you have Tier 1A covered?
In Burlington? Are you talking about Burlington?
No, here in Underhill, for you.
Oh.
There are some other criteria that unfortunately Larry could not qualify with.
Well, Larry's our planning, so if one doesn't have a card.
Either way, like, we don't have capacity.
No, we can't do it.
Volunteer people to do any level of this kind of
Yeah, I think
detailed review.
I think it's wise to go back to something Darren says. There's definitely some capacity issues. So Tier 1A is a status that is being pursued by cities like Burlington and South Burlington and Williston because they have really significant staffing and professional planning and zoning staff, and therefore a lot of capacity to dive into all the details that would be associated with managing all Act 250 permit conditions and issues. We don't have that. I'm a very part-time, one person, very part-time, day and a half a week at the moment, and you're all volunteers, and I think we just need to be realistic about what capacity we have, to manage this stuff.
Or volunteers in the background of experience to look at that stuff is not there amongst all of us or any of us.
That's hurtful, Jeff. I agree.
So Tier 1B is kind of, as I see it, and I don't want to take away your thunder, Darren, but it's kind of an intermediate. It's like, we're not going to manage all of the Act 250, previous Act 250 permits for the town, but we will take on the jurisdiction that we already have for local permitting, and then we'll also be willing to look at the existing Act 250 permit conditions for existing Act 250 permits in the villages.
And
that's it.
To be clear, you actually don't need to take that on for Tier 1B.
Okay.
It's really just saying, like, it's kind of a hands-off on that scale of development for housing specifically. There's not any extra burden on the community, unless there is something that you've been relying on Act 50 to do, like a traffic study. If someone's got a larger development and you say, oh, they're going to get a traffic study anyway because they're going to Act 50, you might need to look at your regulations and require that for those level of developments. But honestly, maybe not even that.
So this looks really pretty inconsequential, actually.
It might
But is, if we just sort of do nothing on that, are we missing out on maybe a step to another process?
Not necessarily, but again, it's really about, you're not sure who might propose a really good project that if Act 250 isn't a requirement for them, they're going to save some money, make that project more affordable for whoever ends up living in this housing that they provide. They might not get stuck in some of that permitting that adds cost and time and make the project kind of unviable. So it's an opportunity to kind of give that nod to saying, we do want housing here, we want it at this scale and up to this level of we can handle and we're comfortable with. And it's just a way to sort of signal that you're interested in that.
There's no downside, actually.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's much in Underhill in terms of, especially for the areas that you're looking at. If we were talking about your rural areas, it might be like, well, you might need to think about some other stuff. But a lot of the things that Act 50 would provide in your villages are kind of already taken care of.
Like what? When you say that, like what?
So the criteria that Act 250 would come into play for a 10 to 15 unit housing project, the things that I can think of are archaeological impacts, maybe some aesthetics, but you've also kind of got some local rules around that, I think, and then traffic impacts. But if you need assistance looking at traffic impacts, the Regional Planning Commission may be able to help. If you need assistance putting together something in your regulations that at least says, hey, if you've got a project 10 to 50 units, of a single, project, we'd like you to get a traffic study. That's an easy add to your regulations. Those are the only things that
I can't think of any way unless like a public system went in of some sort that we're getting a 50 unit development.
Right. And maybe
Or
we will.
Or 10.
In the village center.
The other thing I'll mention about Tier 1B is you do not have to act on it. You can say, we're not interested right now. We can come back to that at any point. I think it would probably be on the cycle of which we update our regional plan, so at minimum 8 years in between if we do an amendment. It might be something you kind of go straight to the land use review board for. So if you're not really sure yet, it's okay to just say, hold off. But as David said, there may not be a downside at this point. If you get a wastewater system and you're like, oh wait, hang on, we got to think about this, you can maybe put a moratorium on that Tier 1B and say, we'd like to take it back until we've evaluated those impacts. But I also would think once you get if you're getting to the point of having a wastewater system, you've evaluated the impacts before you put it in place.
What are the other really, not really rural, the other rural-ish towns in Chittenden County, like Bolton, doing, just out of curiosity?
Maya, you've been working with Bolton, right?
Yeah, they have a kind of historic, well, designated downtown center, but it's mostly in the floodplain, or doesn't have any infrastructure, and then the part that's not in the floodplain has soils that are not adequate for sewer, and so it is not eligible for Tier 1B.
So they did this. So how did they do a study on that?
We look at soil capacity.
We have a map.
Oh, okay.
We have those layers, the data layers. So that's what they're doing.
So you're just looking at like those wetland loam type soil layers on the maps to determine that.
And like floodplain, like FEMA layers.
Yep. Looking at permeability of the soil essentially. Other communities that are sort of in a similar scale, Underhill, Charlotte the Planning Commission recommended Tier 1B for their village commercial districts. So kind of the equivalent of your village centers, but not the village areas around them because they are a little concerned about impacts to existing neighborhoods there. Westford was actually interested in going forward with Tier 1B for their entire village and village area around it, which is a fairly significant area. The only thing is they've just had a lot of community conversations about what to do in that space in that area, so they didn't want to.
Yes, they did.
They didn't want to put the cart before the horse of the community's opinion about what the future looks like there. So they opted to do Tier 1B just for their existing neighborhood development area designation. So the current state designation program, they already had a limited area where essentially it already had a form of Tier 1B. So they said, let's keep it there. In the next, once they've done some more planning work, they're probably going to expand that Tier 1B area. Trying to think, Huntington, I don't actually have an update from them yet. Heinsberg is probably going to go ahead with village center, village area, all the eligible areas. Other rural towns, Richmond. Maya, has Richmond figured that out yet?
They are still in discussion. I think different commissions and committees want different things, so I don't know what they're gonna do.
They face development pressure in a different way than we do.
Yeah. And then I almost forgot your neighbor, Jericho, on Tuesday night, the Planning Commission said they would like Tier 1B for all eligible areas. So that includes the other side of Underhill Flats. All the dark pink and light pink areas would have Tier 1B exemption on the Jericho side.
Interesting.
What about Huntington?
Like I said, I'm not sure we have an update from Huntington yet. They're still having those discussions, and I haven't checked with my colleagues about it.
What would be like the, sorry to keep asking bad interview questions, but if I'm the one who's going to be talking to the select board, like, what is the biggest negative of us doing this?
The biggest negative, I guess you could conceivably have. Is,
what's your negative hypothetical? Yeah.
Very,
that's
very
not crazy.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't see one because not many of the lots that are in the eligible areas are 10 acres or more. The ones that are probably aren't going to have a development that is more than 10 units. I think you may mention that, right? So I don't actually think it's really one way or the other, but
So the way that, so this is an interpretation question for you. So like obviously Act 250 is a state-driven thing. So if you don't do 1B or 1A, the state pretty much runs the show for the permitting review process, and then 1B and 1A are kind of like lesser responsibility for the state, a little bit more responsibility for the municipality that it's in. So like if we say no to all of it, we just say, Vermont, you take care of any and every potential development thing outside our abilities to review more or less.
Oh, it's a property owner that gets stuck with it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying like we don't get involved in terms of like doing any kind of review or permit approval on it. So like a wastewater treatment plant, for instance, like that's kind of a big thing that I would think nobody at this table, including myself, should like be responsible for permitting.
So to be clear, in general, what you said is correct, but a few specifics that we want to clarify. If you decide not to opt into Tier 1B, it's status quo. Nothing changes in terms of Act 250 review. It's still in this, what's going to be called Tier 2 now, where like it's the normal jurisdictional trigger of 10 units on 10 acres or more. So even anything that is 10 acres or less, 10 units or less right now does not trigger Act 250. Unless there's an existing condition or permit. For something like wastewater, there's still going to be, even with Tier 1B exemption, someone doing that development would still have to get their state wastewater permit. And Act 250 doesn't actually review that. It's still the state Department of Environmental Conservation. So that's happening regardless.
Yeah, I guess how I see it is that there isn't, in our current village centers, there's not a single lot that's 10 acres that could be 10 units.
Mhm.
But if we expand the village center, then that might happen. There are bigger lots, but you can't speculate what's going to happen to them. So
You mean on this map, though, Roy?
this map, the current map,
There's not a single lot that
Probably
you think
not,
would
I
be
mean,
affected by it.
Well, even some of these bigger ones outside, I mean, the opportunity of actual usable land to create 10 1 acre lots or whatever is going to be pretty low with the steepness, all the wetland loams that overlap, all this stuff. Like it's
floodplain.
Yeah, it's just a lot of junk on all these lots that really reduce the developability of them.
Yeah. So I guess, we don't have anything to lose by going that route, but it's a moot point, I guess.
Do you have any concerns?
I have a quick question for Darren. So I met with Larry today, and we had some training on this. Fortunately, it's not all brand new. But that said, I was just wondering, from a time standpoint and a cost standpoint, if folks that are going to do development work have to go through 250, and then they had to go through the town's permitting process as well. I'm just wondering how much, more expensive, how much additional time would that be for somebody to get their approvals versus if they were just going through the town? I realize that's kind of a nebulous question because you don't know exactly how long town processes take or how expensive it is, but I'm assuming that it's cheaper and that it would be less time, thus encouraging more development, right?
Yes, Act 250 definitely adds time. I would say, depending on the scale of the project, it's 6 months at least. Plus, you're usually hiring an engineer or some sort of professional to prepare your application and put everything together. It's time waiting for the district commission to issue their findings and dealing with whatever permit conditions they throw at you. Not to paint them in a bad light, but it's essentially a blunt tool for small scale development. It's meant to capture the impacts of larger scale development. And so this is an opportunity for us to say, look, if Act 250 isn't working for this small scale stuff, we can kind of get the small scale stuff out of that game. But as mentioned, maybe in Underhill, the practicality of it is that there really isn't. I see there's one parcel maybe that could be affected and benefit from it. In the Underhill Flats, at least, as I'm sort of poking around, maybe two. So it's up to you.
I will say that Darren's estimate of a minimum 6 months for Act 250 applications start to finish is very, in my experience, 2 to 3 years is more likely what it takes.
Right,
I mean, 6 months might be what it would take. Minor.
Site that hasn't been updated in 4 years.
Yeah. You might get a minor amendment through in 6 months if everybody knows what they're doing and you have paid engineers on staff to push it through. But in Charlotte, I worked on a subdivision project that had gone through the entire process for local subdivision review and finally got their permits. It took about 2 years, mostly because the landowner couldn't decide what she wanted to do and just kept changing her mind. But then they stumbled into the Act 250 process because the whole development was subject to Act 250 permitting jurisdiction years before, and that threw a lot of sand into the gears, and that had not been resolved after more than a year and a half in Act 250 when I left the town at the end of 2024. It didn't look like it was going to get done anytime soon. So, I think big picture, the reason the legislature acted in this way was because they recognized that it doesn't, if the goal here is to remove administrative and bureaucratic barriers to building more housing, it really doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve municipalities, it doesn't serve the state, it doesn't serve the community, and it certainly doesn't serve property owners to have overlapping multiple reviews that are taking place to cover the same project. Right. So towns that don't, there are towns in Vermont that still don't have zoning, and there are many towns that have zoning but have inadequate capacity, professional and otherwise, to really handle the permitting process deftly and get things done in a timely way. So, I think this idea of Tier 1, Tier 1A, 1B status is really in service of that larger objective of removing bureaucratic and administrative barriers to getting timely reviews for projects. There's still plenty of ways for towns to say no to projects that don't seem to be in the public interest or that don't comport with the local regulations. And if we feel confident that we have the capacity to do those reviews in a professional and expedited way with the people that we have in place now, the structure, the development review board, the land use regulations, and our small staffing capacity, I think it behooves us to take this step of asking for Tier 1B status for the town, just for the village centers, because I think it potentially just removes a whole layer of bureaucratic process that doesn't really help anything or anyone. Because if it's a bad project, we can still say no, we can stop it. If it's a good project, we shouldn't be putting barriers in the way of getting new housing built.
So you are pro?
I'm pro. Absolutely.
I guess I have another question. Why haven't they? Why doesn't Tier 1B apply to the rural areas of town? Is that something the state didn't want to address at this point, or?
So the idea behind Act 181 is balancing creating more incentives and opportunities for housing in areas planned for growth, in areas where we want that, but also trying to make sure that there is still protection and maybe higher protection of rural landscapes and natural resources that are important. It was a little bit of a grand bargain that was made. So other elements of Act 181 are going to come into play about increasing jurisdiction in areas of critical natural resources, but that's not part of the regional map process and part of our regional plan. And I think to directly answer your question, Act 250 is still valuable to Vermont, and it has done a lot to prevent large-scale development from going in places that people do want to see stay natural, open, used for working lands, etc.
Okay.
So that's not a piece of you said some of the rules still need to be clarified. The 1B status going outside of the villages isn't a piece of that.
No, that's not really up for debate. 1B is going to be very specifically limited to those centers and village areas and planned growth areas. I don't see that changing. With tier 3, higher level of review for critical natural resource areas, that is still going through some rulemaking and public outreach and development of what the land use review board wants to do with it.
Does anyone
I think one of
else
the
have any
things about,
update?
Act 250 is, that causes a lot of delays is input by so-called interested parties. And if we have this tier 1B, I suppose that would eliminate all the input that might come from so-called interested parties.
Yes, so
Go through the DRB and whatever the DRB's process is, which I'm not an expert on.
Parties,
The DRB.
you know, like, I don't know, Natural Resources Council, you probably wouldn't get involved in this sort of a thing, but there are all these different organizations, that could weigh in as, I'm an interested party in this, and so we want to go through a discussion, and 6 months later, you come out of it.
So you are pro 1B is my takeaway.
Yeah.
Is anyone opposed? Maybe the fast way to do this is this. Is anyone opposed to, you specifically said village center, but is it village center and village area?
Yes.
Just looking at the map, that's the motion.
those are the eligible
Yeah.
ones, and I think what Larry is hoping
And
for,
there's-
or suggesting.
Yeah,
One other question on that, there's no sunset to when that, that could be expanded later, what that bill, there's no, if we decide when the next town plan comes up that, hey, maybe we do want to look at agricultural areas, even though that's not in there now, we could bump that out.
Yep, so the way that would work is when you've done some planning work around that and said, here's what we want to include in village area, and here's why, and the town is behind it, we would then, next time we update our regional plan, include that in a new map, an updated map, and go to the land use review board, and they'd sign off on it. And then it would become eligible for tier 1B, and you could also make that separate choice to give it that exemption.
Okay.
So we're
I'm
basically
not saying I'm pro that, but just.
no, it's
It's
a
an
great
option.
question. It's not frozen in time.
Yeah.
So we're basically just looking to agree on these new pink areas and 1B or not.
Pink and red, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the dark was always there.
The dark hasn't changed, the pink has for Underhill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the new light pink and 1B.
Is anyone opposed to doing 1B in the light pink and dark red in the center and flags?
I did want to just ask another quick clarifying
Go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So just to be clear, that this Act 250 only applies to a minimum of 10 units up to a total of 50 on up to 10 acres of property or more, potentially more than 10 acres of property. And 1B only applies to those 10 to 50 units on a minimum size property at 10 acres. Is that right?
Yes, trying to make sure we got all the
More than.
plus and minus, but yes, I think you got that right.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm getting
Maximum.
at is
Maximum 10 acres.
if there's fewer than, let's say that they're doing 9, is that subject to 250, or would that still be subject to 250 or not?
No, so a project of 9
One,
units
right?
or fewer on 10 acres or less currently is not subject to Act 250 jurisdiction, which is why you see a lot of 9 acre subdivisions in Vermont. So that's not changing and wouldn't change under Tier 1B. What could change is someone saying, hey, I wanted to do 11, but I kept it at 9 because I didn't want to deal with Act 250. Now I can do those extra 2 units.
Got it.
And then it only applies to residential development, not commercial, not wastewater.
Correct. So the Tier 1B is specific to residential development and the residential part of mixed-use development. Just for comparison, Tier 1A is a complete exemption, which also includes commercial development or any other stuff, but you're not considering that because you're not eligible.
Okay, Brian.
Thank you. Sorry, we had the map up, so I couldn't see that you had a question. Does anyone else have any questions, or should we make a motion to recommend to the select board? And Larry has it up on the screen if someone whoever wants to make the motion and just read it. Does someone want to make a motion that we recommend this to the select board?
Oh, yeah.
I
David,
do.
you gotta, it's gotta be that though, word for word.
The motion.
So,
I would, but I can't read it.
I move to recommend to the select board that they request tier 1B status for all eligible areas within the village center and village areas of the regional future land use map.
Thank you, David. Is there a second of David's
You didn't
wonderful
need to- I
motion?
needed my binoculars for that.
Second? Bart?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so are you, sorry, one quick logistical thing. So I'm going to the select board meeting. Are you, Larry, or you coming if they have questions
I am
that
coming.
I cannot answer?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you, Darren.
Yep. Kind of make sure that's what I'm going to, but yes, I will be there. So I can give all this context.
Yeah.
You can tell them what the planning commission decided and
Okay.
why.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else is obviously welcome as well, but you are certainly not obligated to do.
And that's
Okay.
on the 12th, June 12th.
June 12th. Yeah. Okay, so that's done.
Awesome. Thank you both
Thank you for your
for
help.
having the
Yeah.
discussion. And,
That's great. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really
appreciate
glad to-
And thank you, Maya, as well.
Thank you.
So when you guys go to the select board, like I know I wasn't here in the last one, and I know it came up briefly at the beginning of this about like the housing quotas or expectations, like what, do we have to do something on that?
Nope.
So how does that, so I don't know what the number is. I know we talked about numbers a few meetings back. Are those the numbers that you kind of have us targeted as and we need it or we don't, or like how does that work?
Yes, let me explain a little more. So there's a statewide housing needs assessment where the state says, here's our housing need. Here's what it would look like to meet that housing need in a couple of different ways. They've broken that out by regional planning commission. We then have to break that out into municipalities. We came up with a way to do that with our planning advisory committee that Larry sits on, both when he was in Charlotte and now he's here. So essentially, we divided it up into a few categories of towns. Underhill's in the rural category. You get collectively with those other rural towns 3.8% of that regional housing target.
Right.
And that's also broken up into the low, medium, high. And that's a 2050 target.
Right.
There's also a 2030 target, but essentially anything that isn't already in permitting probably isn't going to hit that. What you have to do with that is incorporate that into your town plan and say, here's what the state and the region has said the need is. Here's what that looks like in Underhill. You've already done a good housing element. You've done a housing needs assessment. It should be in line with that. And it's going to be about creating actions in your town plan to help support meeting that housing goal. We recognize that the town isn't going to be building housing to meet that target, but you could do a study to see if you should expand your village areas, look at getting water and wastewater supply, or even just change your regulations to allow more flexibility in certain areas. The one thing that is kind of a statutory requirement that was added, clarified in Act 181 is that a substantial majority of that housing target should be going to your areas shown on this map in pink and light pink.
I have a question. So I'm jumping way ahead, but I'll file it away, or I probably won't be here anymore. Someone else can file it away. So CCRPC has to sign off on our town plan.
Correct.
So what I'm wondering is if the catch is, I don't mean that in a bad way towards you.
You're not the one who's asked this.
If the catch is basically like we say, like we hate these plans.
Yeah.
We want to build 20, right?
Yeah.
So our town plan comes in and we've changed basically nothing. Is CCRPC not going to sign off on our town plan?
That's essentially how this is set
So
up.
that's where they've got
We
the
don't want
stranglehold on
What's the slap on the wrist to not get them to sign off on it? Like, what is?
Well, you're
anything over
not
the
having your
space?
town plan approved is bad because you're not eligible for certain grants and stuff from the state.
And it actually also can jeopardize your ability to have zoning regulations.
Oh
So
yeah, I
it's pretty
forgot about that.
Gestapo-y then, right? Like they're like, hey, you have to.
That feels like a bold claim, but continue.
Well, it is kind of. If they're like, hey, we did all this math for you guys, and this is the number, and we're like, well, we don't like that number. We think our math is this. but you're like, no, this is it, or we're not signing off on it. Like, that's how it feels, kind of.
But we don't
I
have to
think
have the
way
number
the
in
way
our
it really
town plan.
works is, we have our own ideas. We present them to the regional planning commission. They have ideas too. They present them to us, and then they kind of work together on these.
So when does that happen, though?
In 2029, well, 2028 probably.
When you
So
start
we
your
have to
next town
start
plan.
doing that. Okay, so there's time between now and then.
I think the last town plan, David, I wasn't here when we started it. It was like a 1.5 year process, wasn't it? I came in like the last year. You guys were already. Well, I joined the planning commission a year before the last town plan was done, and they were already a third of the way through. So I think it's like an 18-month process to redo the town
Yeah,
plan.
minimum, that's a good, somewhere between 18 and 24 months is a good target to have. Give yourself space. But yeah, so in terms of what happens between now and then, you've got this target. You've already got some actions in your town plan that talk about housing. Keep doing those. It'll help you get there.
Yeah.
When you go to readopt your town plan, it's a chance to look at that target and say, okay, where are we? What progress have we made? What is there left to do? What can we do to enable that? And it's not necessarily all regulations or changing everything wholesale. It could just be little tweaks here and there.
I'm just thinking it's a big catch. Like, so the state's, I looked it up earlier, the state's expectation by 2050 is like 172,000 new units, which if you do math and say like, okay, that's like 1.8 people per unit, that's like 300,000 people. That's like 50% of what we are now. So they want to grow to like 1 million people in this state. Like, that number is just insane. I mean, I don't know where they come up with that. Like, yeah, maybe 1 million people want to move here, but the same concept is 1 million people want to go to this fancy restaurant in New York City, but they can't all get in all at once because they all want to be there. Like, there's kind of a process of like, occupancy load, safety for everybody, just sustainability of like the facility. So to just be like, yeah, well, 1 million people want in, so we just got to like figure out how to make that happen. It's kind of a half thought out.
It was a little more thought out
to
than
me.
that. I can explain how.
25 years away too.
Yeah, but that's still a lot of growth. 25 years goes fast, man. And with the way that I've seen things develop around here, like, that's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because it takes like 3 years to build a house around here.
And I think that's
just
part of it.
hypothetical. It's just a guess.
Right.
I know, but they got to sign off on it, Like, that's the thing that's worrisome about it, is like, you don't get your town plan signed off.
Do we have to have the number in our town plan, or we just have to
You have
look
to have a
like
number
we're
in your
addressing
town plan.
housing?
Yeah, you do have to have the number in your town plan, and you have to have the actions, but those actions are up to you of how you want to meet them. We'll have some suggestions.
But we basically have to agree that we're okay with the state saying we need 172,000 housing units in this state in some form or fashion, divided amongst all of us.
Yeah, and we've tried to divide that up for all of our communities in a way that makes sense. We're not saying, it's divided by 19 and that's what everyone gets. That would make Underhill have hundreds more units than they could really accommodate. We tried to keep it in line with your existing development pattern, but acknowledging that we're going to have to do a little bit to catch up. And here's a little bit, I'm sorry I don't have this for GoToMeeting. Maya's seen it. Michael and Zach's apologies, I can send it around later. And also, it's a little small. So here's what we're looking at and how these numbers were developed. There's a lower and an upper. We have a mid, that's just the difference between the midpoint of those. What we're looking at is, in that housing needs assessment that the state put together, what would it take to replace vacant homes that are falling apart and are being lost from our housing stock because we're already kind of behind? What would it take to house the homeless that we know are there because there isn't enough supply? What would it take to accommodate the growth that we already expect at a minimum? Because Vermont is still growing. We're looking at the population projections, and there's still going to be people coming here, whether or not we build more housing. And then there's another level of accommodating. Where is it here?
Household growth?
Household growth. So that's the population growth.
Oh.
The difference between that low and high target is the low is kind of the bare minimum we need to just have some form of stability in our housing market. Like, it's going to be probably the status quo today, maybe a little better of like costs are high, demand is high, there's a lot of competition for things, and you really have a hard time finding a house, building a house, etc. The high end is if we were able to address like the workforce shortages for construction labor, and also trying to get housing markets to a point where it's actually affordable, and not even just affordable, but like viable to do that plus something else and invest in your future. That's sort of the the low high, like bare minimum, and gee, where would we like to be? So we're advocating aiming for the middle, saying what's realistic of maybe what we could achieve in between that.
So if we, so what is our number right now? Do we, is it?
Larry, can you pull that up? Do you have it up already?
Yeah, we have it. What is it?
So Underhill.
So 141, 282, 423.
Okay, so I did the math. So on this form, there was a form that said our number for Chittenden County was like 15,700 to like 47,000.
Correct.
So at 3.8%, at the low end was like 600 houses. I think we're rural. There's 7 rural towns divided by 7. That's like 85 houses.
Your number is 141, 282, 243, and then it's annualized to 6, 11, and 17.
Yes.
Underhill has been building 9 units a year on average from 20, I want to say 2000 to 2020 is what it is. If you scroll up, Larry, we can see what that says. 2000 to 2023. So you're already meeting your low target if you do nothing. But the issue is that it's kind of scattered throughout town. We're saying you might want to think about putting more of that in your village centers.
Yeah.
If you were to stretch a little bit, you'd meet that mid target.
But at the same time, there's no infrastructure for that kind of development in our town.
And that's what the housing actions would be all about, is saying, hey, if we were to try and meet these targets and maybe aim for the mid and try to get it in our villages, what would that lead? Infrastructure is one of those. What does that look like? The state and CCRPC can help you figure that out. You don't have to commit to it. You don't have to do anything in particular, but this is all about saying, let's start the conversation. Let's do the planning work. I mean, if we're going to put a plan together, like, don't just say, oh yeah, we're going to plan for it, but we'll see what happens. This is trying to put your money where your mouth is.
My main concern with the numbers is, which I think I said last time, but like, it feels like without the state giving us money to do like a big sewage system or something like that, like, and maybe I'm wrong. Look, you get some ADUs, which I'm a highly skeptical those are long-term housing, and that it's actually adding housing, but whatever. I guess if it counts towards the number. But like, it feels like the easy pickings, for lack of a better word, have been developed, and it's actually going to get like incrementally harder and harder to hit the goal every year without infrastructure, money, and expertise. So like, that's the biggest thing for me. Like, when we do come to that town plan, like, how do we say with a straight face, we're going to do X, Y, and Z if the state's not going to give us money to do something that would actually allow density to increase? Because that's the whole plan, right? Like, density needs to increase in certain areas. Because we're up on hills with steep slopes and farms, and like, so it's almost like the town plan has to say, like, if the state gives us money, then.
And that is exactly what this document's all about. We had some of this in our initial documents, but this is outlining, I'll hold it up here, the benefits that you get from having these pink and light pink areas on our future land use map. It's the new designation program, and one of those benefits is infrastructure funding priority. So, because we've got
so that's a benefit of doing
that's where they're going to send the money to do infrastructure planning.
Got it.
Right, because it's definitely a recognition in Act 181 that you can't just have sticks, you got to have carrots. And the carrots for going down this road of getting the tier 1, tier 2, et cetera, designation in the village and municipal and town centers, it is that the state is prepared to offer incentives for towns that commit to higher density models and bylaws that support that. And just to take a couple steps back, I think Jeff was very articulate in spelling out kind of the worst case analysis, and kind of the local, it's my property, why other people telling me what to do with it perspective, which is very rampant in Vermont, is its historical tradition behind that. But the other side of it is that many town plans, including our own here in Underhill, are very vague in their policy statements about housing. I mean, all the right words are there. You say, yes, we need more housing for people in the workforce, for young families, for elders. but there's no specific numbers or targets in there. So it's easy to say, yeah, we're all in favor of mom and apple pie and waving the flag, but when it comes down to brass tacks, it's like, what are we actually going to do about it? And this is not an unusual pattern. I mean, there's the same pattern in Charlotte and the town plan there. A lot of nice words about housing, good intentions, but no specific commitments to targets. And without targets, how are you going to judge whether you're making progress towards it? So, I mean, part of going down this road is saying that we are making a commitment as a community to get real about how much housing we think we can sustain in this community and what we're going to support from a planning and zoning perspective to go forward, realizing that we need help from the state and from other sources. And we need also interested property owners who would like to act on some of these regulations that are changing to allow housing in order for housing to actually happen. No one is going to shove a particular type of development down a property owner's throat as a result of this process. It's still, property owners are still going to be in the driver's seat as far as whether, if and how much they want to choose to develop their properties. So what we're really talking about is changing the rules, starting with the municipal plan and then the zoning bylaws, to make sure that the rules are in alignment with a specific target and specific goals for housing, and not just being content with sort of expressing general good wishes and leaving it at that.
Right.
You're creating the environment for that housing to be made by.
I just think it feels less organic and more forced when it's like, this is what the state wants. Figure out a way to make this happen in 25 years. Like it's not that I'm saying, hey, don't touch my property, tell me what to do with it. It's just like, why don't you just let it organically happen? I mean, yeah, make some regulations so that it's not physically impossible to happen, but don't be like, hey, we really got to do this by 2025, or Uncle Sam's going to come knocking and asking for restitution or something, right? So,
Well, it seems like the upside of 1B is, like, in hindsight, since we did the motion before,
yeah.
well, like, the town plans aren't going to be approved if they don't address housing anyway. And if you don't have 1B, you're not eligible for money. So you sort of end up in the same place, but without the resource.
1B is different from the money incentives, but
Oh, it is. Okay.
But 1B is a good signal to say, hey, we're doing what we can. We've
Okay.
opted into this.
Got it.
Another thing would be, doing at least a wastewater study, for instance, to say what could we accommodate. And if the wastewater study comes back and says, hey, you can only get 50 units instead of 100 and whatever, okay, we'll adjust your housing target, or we'll find another way to make that work.
Are you going to just get money from that study, Darren?
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
You got any advice for us on that?
Contact us at our UPWP. So in the fall, we put out a call for what do our communities need? What do you need help with? So next fall, Larry can help you prepare an application for that.
Now we've got your name and email, Darren.
Yeah, you know where to find us.
Write another report, Larry.
Well, Jericho is already pursuing that.
Yes.
They have a request in. They did a preliminary engineering study. It said that there was capacity in the Flats district to add wastewater additional units, to wastewater capacity for additional units. Not a sewage treatment plant, but just leach fields that could accommodate more housing. And so then the next step is the actual engineering of that system, and they put in application for state funding to get that, and they've invited Underhill to go in with them on that process, where we would only be responsible for 10% of the local cost if it's funded and built.
How do we get there though? Do we have to go to the select board to ask for that 10%?
The select board would have to agree that this makes sense for the town of Underhill. They haven't had that request yet, but
Could we put that on the agenda?
we could ask them to consider it. Or for our meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Sure. We could do
We'll
that.
talk about it
Yeah.
next
No, I
meeting
think
or the
we
meeting
said
after,
support.
however it shakes out.
Yeah.
I have one random question for you just while you're here. I'll just use me as an example. So, do the projections include, not to be morbid, but mortality? Like,
Yes.
I'm 50. I mean, I very much plan on being here in 2050, but I don't actually get to choose that.
Yeah.
So are those calculated in?
Whoa.
Yes, they are. So they did a sort of age cohort of, I think,
Got it.
5 years, like what's going to happen in 5 years, what's going to happen in the next 5 years. I will acknowledge there is in the statewide housing needs assessment, if you look into it, there's a little bit of a drop off around 2040 when some of the folks who are currently in their 50s and 60s will eventually pass on. The question is, and
Well, I mean, it's reality, right?
Yeah,
That's why you chose.
I mean,
one.
Brian went there. But
That's why.
then there's
that's
this
why I
question of,
think
okay, so who fills that gap, and what does that look like? As a loss of that significant of a population in Vermont would kind of change a lot of our
housing.
social structure, and well, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe more housing be available,
Yeah.
but also fewer people in general. Like, what
Yeah.
happens to your communities?
Yeah.
So part of these housing targets is thinking about like how do we kind of make that transition of like
Oh, interesting.
bringing in new people and the
Yeah.
families who have had to leave because they can't live here anymore and they can't
Yeah.
afford to. How do we bring them
You
back?
want young people with kids,
Right,
and like you need a good spread of. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Vermont is,
Education.
Vermont is the third oldest state in the United States.
No, that's right.
And the population trends are like leveling off and going down.
If we do nothing.
If we do nothing.
Mhm.
And major employers in the area that are growing the job base, including Beta Technologies as one example, are having to turn away new hires because new hires accept a job conditionally and finding a house, a place to live that they can afford. They can't find a place to live, so they say, sorry, I'm going to have to reject this job. So that's bad for the community, it's bad for our economy, and we even have situations now where some major employers like UVM Medical Center and Middlebury College are actually investing in building new housing because that's the only way that they can ensure that there's going to be affordable places for new employees to move into and live, to work at those places. So, it's an extraordinary crisis.
We experienced that 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Moving here from Minnesota, and my husband's employer made it very, not easy, but made it easier for us to move here.
CSU need ADUs for all those traveling nurses, that's big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is just Jeff's pitch.
We're going to check for the rest of your agenda because we're taking up more than enough of your time.
Do you want to get the number to call on the recording in case anyone's watching?
But we are around if you ever have further questions. So I'm
Thank you,
sure we'll
Darren.
see you again. We'll see you on the 12th.
Thank you, Maya.
Hopefully we'll see you again when you apply for some assistance to help you with your next step, whatever that looks like.
You'll be hearing from us.
Great. Love to spend more time with you. Actually, it's truly like we don't get to see you guys enough.
Well, thank you very
All right,
much
thank
for your
you.
time.
Yeah. Thank you, Darren. Yeah.
Thanks. See you, man.
I'm going to make a proposal to the Planning Commission at the risk of looking lazy to our new members. We have like 10 minutes to talk about ADUs, which doesn't make a lot of sense, I think.
No.
I would propose that we kick it to next meeting. I think being real about our timing for next meeting. Russ called in. I already know from Brad that Dave Sills is going to come in about sawmills. What's it? No, there's a 10-minute public comment limit now per person, which I feel like is actually quite long.
Well, if you get 5 people, that's.
Yeah, it could take quite a lot of time. So, I think we should reserve an hour.
About
First time.
okay.
Hour for what now? For this?
So for firewood processing.
Oh.
I mean, just being realistic, right? Which leaves a half hour for ADUs. And then that would be the whole next meeting.
But we're close to ADUs. We're so close
I think so.
to wrapping it up.
I love your.
Well, it depends, man, I mean, once David starts reading.
No, you are, I agree with you.
You see?
I agree. I agree. I already know that David and I disagree on this 400-foot thing, so that'll take a minute. And then I was thinking just to jump a meeting ahead after that for everyone. So background for the 3 new folks at least. So we had done some stuff before we thankfully got Larry, where we did it and then sort of set it aside. And the 2 main things, I think, Larry, after, so let's say we can knock out sawmills and ADUs. Probably being overly optimistic on sawmills, but let's say in theory that we can. I think trails and wedding venues, if we could revisit those and bring them up and try to finalize them at the meeting after that, then we would have some things that we could package up, because then we'd have ADUs, wedding venues, trails, because we in theory already did wedding venues and trails. So you all can see them and see if you like them, and David can bring up some stuff that he didn't bring up before.
One other little thing I would like to include
What do you
along
got?
that line, if
Yep.
possible, which would be a proposal to the select board to modify the road ordinance so that driveways, serving, for instance, one house, if they add in a ADU to that, that it would not change the specifications necessary. If there are two houses on a driveway and the driveway meets the specifications for two houses, the two additional ADUs would not actually trigger a redoing of the driveway and so on. So this is just a proposal I'll put before you.
My only 2 cents on that is that we might want to run that by Brad Holden first, because as you know, Bob is very involved with the fire department on the select board, so we would want to make sure that we preview that, I think, as Brad.
We should at least change it. Well,
The enemy of the good is the perfect, and the
I don't
the fire department is.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I just know that is a hot button topic on the select board, and we should make sure we preview it past Brad and make sure that he is.
Well, we should at least make it the same as Jericho, because we share the same fire department, and Jericho is less restrictive than Underhill.
Okay, well, there's
So we should look at their regulations
It was an issue.
and adopt that.
So maybe when we do ADUs, we can also talk about the
roads,
the driveways.
Yeah.
Okay. That will make sense.
So next meeting is July?
What's that?
June 5th.
Yeah.
June 5th, and after that is June 19th.
Yes.
So next meeting, sawmills and ADUs will be the main topics.
Yeah.
And then June 19th, community septic, you want to talk about that?
Yes.
And then also trails and wedding venues to bring that.
Yeah, we can just start it.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Is the wedding venues piece part of the event? I remember.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a.
Sorry, event venues. Yeah, you were here
Yeah,
for.
it was cool. That was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll just take a look at it and make sure it all makes sense, and you all can take a look at it. Okay, well, David, are there any motions you might want to make? Yeah, they're good.
Let's not forget the meeting minutes.
Oh, wait, oh, sorry, I almost forgot something. Sorry, David, I'm stealing your thunder. What's the date of the minutes?
May 1st.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on the May 1st meeting minutes? I would make a motion that we approve the May 1st meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Bart, all in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. David, is there a motion you'd like to make?
Adjourn.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
Second.
Bart, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.